Next guest is a friend of the show and been show for a long time. He's David C. Stokes. Do not get him confused with David B. Snokes. Show Me Institute Director of Development, also a good friend of the show. Good morning, David Stokes.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
All right, let's try and keep this conversation civil, please, because it looks like the Taxi Cab Commission has digressed, and now they're calling other taxi cab commissioners feminine female products.
Right. Can we say that? I don't even know. Can we say the word on the radio?
I almost did. I think we should keep the conversation above the fray.
Perfect. Then I shall gladly do so.
Yes, it's just a female product, a feminine hygiene product. That one male commissioner called another male commissioner.
And if you want the actual word, it's all over the interwebs.
It's right. That's right. It's not too hard to find. Yeah, you could probably see it on a prominent television show at some point. Right. You could see a mother asking a daughter that question on national TV. With that being said, the real story is that Uber tried to give away their product for free and was told they weren't allowed to.
They were told by the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, the MTC, that they were not allowed to offer free rides so people could experience it over the 4th of July weekend. And I'd like to thank the MTC for this. I want to thank the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission.
Because
if there was any doubt beforehand who they were working for, whether they were working for the people of the St. Louis region or working for the taxi cab industry, I commend them for removing all doubts. So it is now completely obvious and clear that they work for the members of the taxi cab industry that dominate the commission, and they do not care about the ordinary St. Louisans. And that is true with many, many of these types of boards and commissions out there. The Board of Cosmetology, the Board of Mechanical Permitting in St. Louis County, where they do the heating and air conditioning. You set up these boards, and they protect their industry. Under the guise of public safety, they protect their industry. And the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission right now is getting much more press than many of these other ones ever do. And they cover a more public area than many of these other boards. But they are harming our region with their choices and decisions right now.
Here's what I find interesting about this debate. That the Taxi Cab Commission says, hey, it's a state statute. It says this, right? And yet they have Uber in Columbia, Missouri. They have Uber in Kansas City, Missouri. So if Columbia and Kansas City, Missouri can figure out how to get along, how come they can't do that here in St. Louis?
Well, they could. I mean, there is a special state statute setting up the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission for the St. Louis region. For as bad as the MTC is, the only thing good I can say about them is that a decade ago it used to be worse. When the St. Louis County and St. Louis City had their own terrible taxi cab commissions, people went to prison over the St. Louis County Taxi Cab Commission about 12, 13 years ago, if you recall that scandal.
Right.
So at least now there's only one awful regulatory agency, which I guess is better than two.
Right.
But yes, they have latitude in how they set up rules for the St. Louis region. There's nothing in state law that is preventing them from allowing Uber, Lyft, and other ride-sharing companies. They are choosing to keep them out, all under the guise of this bogus argument of public safety. That's really about protecting their industry members. And thank God for this weekend and their ruling, because that should now be clear to absolutely everybody.
So how does Uber get to the finish line? What do the people do because it's an unelected board? The mayor clearly wants Uber. Stanger clearly does not want Uber. So how does the public, who is being harmed, as you say, by this, what's the public to do?
Boy, great question. And I know there's people out there who are unbelievably frustrated over this. And to turn it around, to try and see the good out of it, I hope there's a lot of people, particularly young people out there, who believe in big government, who are now seeing the harms of big government, who are now seeing the harms that when you give government control over your economic life,
right,
that lots of bad things can happen. But to answer your question directly, I think that the state legislature, they set up the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission. They can change it, and I would hope in the next session they will do so. That said, there's no reason to give up the public pressure. People have rights to contact their to contact the board and to express themselves however they choose to. And if enough people continue to do so, then I hope we'll see change. Because as much as it is an unelected board, I mean, if there's an overwhelming outpouring of obvious desire that people want these choices in transportation, then hopefully this board will eventually respond to that. If not, hopefully the state will just simply change the composition of the board.
To show you how unbelievable that decision was, that they didn't allow Uber to give free rides. If I were to text you, David Stokes, and say, can you give me a ride to the airport? Would you be breaking the law if you gave me a ride to the airport?
That is such a great question and exposes all the bogus aspects of their argument. Of course, I can get a ride with you to the airport,
Right.
or we can go out and have dinner together. And I believe it or not, I'm legally allowed to pick you up. and if I want to if you want to reimburse me for part of the gas, if we took a long trip together,
Right.
That's allowed. but it does raise a really interesting question about how to regulate, and I would hope for very limited regulation, emerging industries like this, like Airbnb, the web-based hotel industry.
Right.
Like, when does that go from really nothing different from allowing a buddy to stay at your house and he or she gives you $20 because
Right.
they ate some of your food?
Right.
I mean, what's the difference between that and Airbnb?
Right.
So where is the point that you cross the line into a fully operating business? And I know the bed and breakfasts out there are mad at us at the Show Me Institute because we spoke about this a few weeks ago on the show. We supported taxing bed and breakfasts
Right.
at the commercial aspect, just like the hotels they're competing against. But admittedly, at some level, there's a very difficult line to draw, and the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission is way too far on the edge of keeping new competitors out.
Well, the fact that St. Louis is the largest St. Louis metropolitan area not to have Uber, so we're the biggest, but there's also a ton of towns smaller that have it. Southern Illinois, you can go from Southern Illinois to a Cardinal game using Uber, but you can't go from a Cardinal game to Southern Illinois. Sounds like, we were talking to Uber the other day, St. Charles County is about to allow Uber into St. Charles County. So you'll be able to take an Uber ride starting in St. Charles County and go to the city or the county of St. Louis, but not the other way around. So the noose is sort of tightening around the St. Louis Taxi Cab Commission.
And thankfully,
Right.
Look, when you hear most of the commissioners on the MTC, excluding Chris Summers, who's fighting a valiant fight and being attacked by his fellow commissioners for having the audacity to not toe the commission line and to think for himself here.
He was the one called a feminine hygiene product.
Right, he
Yes.
was, and it's so absurd that he can't do his own job, and he's going to be subject to personal attacks here.
Right.
And I'm a little biased here, having known Chris a long time.
But you
it's
don't have
ridiculous.
you don't have two commissioners who are using or calling people names. I mean, that's where this is now digressed to. I mean, in all joking aside, you really shouldn't have two people sitting on a commission calling other people names.
Right, and they shouldn't be attacking Chris Summers for having the audacity to, as I said,
Right.
not toe the commission line.
Right, to have a difference of opinion.
But the key point out there is when these other commissioners are out there saying, oh, it's about safety and protecting you, remember, it's working just fine in almost every other part of America.
Right.
It's working just fine in Southern Illinois. It's working fine in other parts of Missouri. They're allowing it in, and the way it's set up with, you can preview, you know who's coming to get you, you can check their prior ratings from prior customers, it works fine. And if you don't like it, you want greater safety, then you are free to choose a traditional taxi cab. But the idea that the MTC is out there telling me and tens of thousands of other St. Louisans who we can choose to engage with is reprehensible, and they're not doing it to protect you, the consumer. They're doing it to protect the taxi cab industry.
David Stokes, where can we read you? When can we see you?
We've got a lot of great information on this from my colleague Joe Miller at showmeinstitute.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
That's David C. Stokes. David, have a good week. Thanks.
Thanks, McGraw. Thanks, Kelly.
You got it. Or you can just use Metrolink like Joe Miller does. Get rid of your car.
That's a fine option, too.